Think it.
All right, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll give everyone just a couple of minutes to get in and get settled. We know it takes everyone just a few minutes to get in. Before we get settled, we'd like to get everyone kind of engaged in the chat. So why don't you give us a hello? Let us know kind of where you're coming from. I like to ask a question. So we're kind of in the heat of summer. So what's your favorite way to stay cool during the summer? Mine is definitely to go swimming or sit poolside. Jordan, how about you? What's your favorite way to stay cool during the summer?
Live in Canada. It's pretty easy. You just,
Yeah, that's true.
you know,
Does it ever get really hot? Do you get some heat waves?
yeah. We'll get. I got to do my Fahrenheit conversion, but like we'll get into the 90s
Yeah.
briefly. You'd run out to the mountains from Alberta. It's three
Yeah,
hours away, and then the nights are nice and cool.
that's nice. Here in the middle of the country, US, we get super humid, super hot. There's no really way to escape it except to find some air conditioning or find a pool. So, oh, I see some Texas here. It's tough to escape the heat, Texas. You definitely have to find some AC or some water there too. I see some of your Canadian friends. Definitely a cool beverage.
Excellent.
Find some ice cream, a popsicle. That also always helps. I will always take the super heat though over the freezing cold. I would way rather cool
That's a
off than try to warm up.
that's a debate. You should do a poll for that one right now.
We
See what
should
it
do a
is.
poll. We should do a poll.
I've run into a few Texans that dispute that. They're like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, they have, yes, it's way hot longer than it is cold, but in the dead of the, when it's dark all the time and so cold, I'm always longing for the hot days of summer. So I definitely would always rather try to cool off than warm up. All right. Well, Jordan, if you want to share your slides, we'll get started today. I think we are, got enough attendees to get started today. So again, thank you everyone for being here today for today's webinar, Mastering Data Migration, Aligning IT and Governance for Strategic Success. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jennifer Millett, and I am the Vice President of Event Strategy and Partnerships here at ARMA International. And if you are a member, thank you so much for being here with us today and taking advantage of your membership. If you are not a member, we highly encourage you to go take a look at arma.org and see all the opportunities we have to enhance your career. We've got all kinds of things from uh, engagement opportunities, education, great ways to interact with others in your profession through industry groups or um, near and dear to my heart at events, all kinds of good ways to engage and be a part of the community. So take a look at arma.org and see all the things we have to offer. Jump to the next screen. And then, of course, we've got InfoCon, which is the largest event in the records and information governance space happening in beautiful Phoenix, October 19th to the 22nd. We have our early bird rates happening through next Monday. So make sure you go and register now to take advantage of the lowest price we have available. And Jordan and his team will be there joining us and offering a really great pre-con. So if you're looking for some Microsoft training, Jordan and his team will be there doing a 2-day pre-con on Microsoft records management training. So definitely go to arma.org and take a look at that education offering that we have. It's definitely some really great training. It's gotten some really good feedback. We offer it almost on a monthly basis, right, Jordan, virtually, but this will be a really good opportunity to come together in person and get some hands-on in-person training for that course. So go to arma.org and learn more about InfoCon and all the really great things that are happening there. And of course, that hands-on Microsoft Purview records management training that will be happening there. So take a chance. And then, of course, we've got all kinds of good webinars and education happening in our webinar series. So here's all the things that we have coming up. So you can also find more information about this at arma.org as well. And then on to the next. A few housekeeping items. We do have subtitles turned on, so if you want to turn those off, you can just click the button, little here by the CC button and turn those off. If you've got a question for Jordan today, just click that QA button and put your question there. We will make sure we get those to Jordan. If you put them in the chat box, that kind of goes quick and we can lose those questions there. So make sure you put your questions in the Q&A box and then put your comments and keep the chat lively in the chat box, and we'll make sure we keep the comments there, and then the Q&A goes in the Q&A box. And then also we love those reaction buttons. So if you hear something you like, give Jordan a thumbs up or a heart or whatever you like. And then frequently asked questions. Can you have a copy of the recording? Can you get the slides? And we're getting IGPCUs for the session. Yes, yes, and yes. Just keep an eye on your inbox. We'll be sending an email out this week with links to all of those things and information to get your IGP credits. There will also be some links for relevant information to get all that. Access to all those things in your inbox. So with that, just want to thank Jordan for dedicating his time to us today and for all the things that Cadence Solutions does and their dedication to ARMA. So when you are considering products and services for your organization, we hope that you consider those organizations that dedicate to you. So with that, Jordan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Just a time check. We have 1 hour. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so we got lots of time. All right, well, mic check, sounds like everyone can hear me. I don't see the Q&A live, so Jen or Megan, if you're there, if you can prompt me if there's something that's urgent as we go through the presentation. So hello, everyone. I'm Jordan. I'll go through Mastering Data Migration today. I've given this presentation a few times at ARMA. It always seems to be really well attended, so we arranged a webinar here with Jen and ARMA. And Jen and I agree on everything except football teams. We're bitter rivals there, and her team's better than mine. So we'll park that for another day, but it's one thing we will not agree on. I'll go through briefly about myself. I'll go through a couple of different components in migration. So the information governance side, of course, that's the audience here and what you're most interested in. Tooling for migrations, how do you actually have a solution that's actually going to move that data for you, whether that's from a file share or a legacy ECM system. Seeing a lot of trends in that space right now. Questions to ask IT. There's a few like key takeaway slides. You will get a copy of the slides, but there's a few I'll prompt you to maybe take a picture of to put in your back pocket for those IT or steering committee meetings, so you can sound really smart going in there with some technical questions. And then what do you do post migration? A lot of organizations kind of forget that after the data's in there, that is just the start. There's a whole living, breathing system and information management needs to take place, of course, as you know. But that's something that I'll touch on as well. All right, so a bit about me. A few of you have seen me present before, but I've been doing content management for coming up on 20 years, which makes me sound really, really old. That's an older, younger picture of me as well. Leader in data governance, focused on records management, data protection, been through a lot of the ECM systems, a lot of time spent with OpenText, Alfresco before that, SharePoint way back in the day when it was like the 2003 release on-prem. And I'm actually the president of the ARMA Edmonton chapter. So I give back to the community as well and participate in the membership in the community here. So InfoGov in data migration. So as we're going through and defining a migration project, there's a couple of different things we want to look at, like what defines success for your project. And I'll double down on some of that in a future slide here. Planning for the future as well. So what does that look like? Cleanup and mapping data is always common and something we want to look at. And then the gotchas. What's going to trip you up? What is that vendor or that internal person not going to think of that's going to give you that's going to pop out there? I'm going to see if I can pop the chat out here to a separate screen. So if you do have a chat, you can put it in there. And Q&A, I will put there as well. Looks like we already got a question from someone, so I'll park that till the end. There will be time at the end for questions. I can go through the question and polling at that time. So what will make your project a success? So specifically, what is success for your organization in terms of doing a data migration? Of course, we want to retain all the data and make sure we keep the integrity. We want to generally take that opportunity to improve data governance. And if we're looking for a wish list item or something that really sells this to internal IT or whoever's making that decision, is can we optimize something for a business unit? If we're walking into accounts payable, can we look at invoice automation by moving to a new tool set? A lot of success for organizations now is defined as exiting another system. And that's not just because they're tired of the tooling in the old system. It may be a hard date on a contract renewal for licensing or the support and maintenance on a proprietary old legacy ECM system. So we help a lot in that as well in terms of like how do we exit and sunset the old system? What does that time frame look like before the renewal of an agreement? And if you can get out before that agreement, you can usually find dollars to go and fund your migration project if you're moving into something like SharePoint, where you likely have that license already purchased. So defining success is important, and it's more than just finding that 100% data migration metric and sticking to it. There's other opportunities here. If you're in the record space and you're trying to get a project funded, go talk to IT about all the other things you can do in Purview once your data gets into SharePoint or the 365 stack. Data loss prevention, or data loss prevention, e-discovery, AI, the AI is all the talk and the hype right now, of course. All those little things, we can tag records to it because we're moving into the right system. So define success for that migration. And there's a couple other ways you can do it besides just one-for-one data moving. When you're going through and planning for the future, I like to use this impact and effort matrix. So the success definition you're going to create with your steering committee or whoever's in your inner circle there. We're going to determine what's a high effort, high impact, what's a low effort, low impact, and where do we want to be on here? Usually, of course, we want low effort, high impact. That's usually, can we get all the data in? Great. Can we do some light automation that may be low effort with a high impact, maybe some automatic metadata capture, or we can roll out the retention schedule first and then migrate everything into the location that the retention schedule is on. So this is something that you're able to snag here and put in presentations and start to pinpoint those initiatives and where they should be in terms of this matrix. So if we're planning for the future, it always comes down to user adoption, which really is change management. And are the users going to consistently use that new system, right? Once the shine wears off the new system, the technology, are they going to continue using it? And we all, I think, generally recognize that in order to use the system post-migration, we need a proper information architecture, specifically something that they understand. So I worked at my local municipality prior to Cadence, and we had a great records manager. Her name was Pauline. And unfortunately, Pauline wanted a lot of people to think like a records manager, which wasn't a logical thing for the bus mechanics and the lifeguards and all the other staff that, they weren't typical information workers. So we came up with this information architecture that could help in terms of organizing, structuring, and getting users to be comfortable getting to a location for their content. And I'll drill down into this in a couple slides here. So we got to look at navigation. There's those two types of users. There's the filers and there's the pilers. The filers want to navigate a few levels. They want a bit of a taxonomy. They want to see, let's use a procurement example, vendors, cadence, and then maybe contracts listed by year, right? If we're working in facilities, you may go by asset number or some kind of navigation for that taxonomy. The pilers, the people, if you open your Outlook and you see 25,000 emails at the inbox level and no subfolders, and they're always filtering and searching, they're generally happy just hitting the search bar, and they ignore a taxonomy and they ignore the navigation just with their behavior. So you can make both groups happy, the filers and the pilers, by actually building a taxonomy system. You can't make the filers happy if you just go and don't have an information architecture and have one big dumping ground of information. No structure. We want to look at permissions and access. If you're moving into 365, that's entre groups. Make sure it's coming all the way from the top down. We're not granting individual folks access to documents consistently in the hierarchy. Sharing is a pretty obvious one. Searching from two perspectives now. So users are able to search. If you're moving into Copilot and this is a SharePoint project, you can restrict specific sites out of the enterprise search and out of Copilot searching them as well. So there's ways to say, look, we're in the legal site. This should not be eligible for AI to be in here. Maybe HR is out of there as well. So you can start to nitpick and disable some of those locations. Collaboration, I get asked this question all the time. What is the number one feature that everybody's after? Honestly, it's co-authoring. 2 people editing a document or more at the same time. We get the biggest win on the change management side of things, and a few slides before, consistently using a new system. If you are migrating in and you have a decent information architecture and you can show your user community that you're going to be able to edit this at the same time, even externally with a vendor, very, very big win. We layer governance on top of that, of course, in EIA, and then metadata is a given. We need metadata, but we don't need the old school 15 to 20 fields that are mandatory per document to get them in there. We need metadata fields for anything that runs a case closure on a records retention. We need metadata fields for any in-depth field we want to search on or have as a displayable column, and anything we want to report on. Everything else is available through searching within the content of the document. Full text search is essentially a bit of a metadata killer. If you disagree, throw it in the Q&A and we can discuss it at the end. So the 3 pillars of information architecture. Can I find my files? If users are going to phone the help desk and they're not going to be happy with the system, it's because they can't find anything. How do I find this? Common problem we get all the time. Next one, usability. Where do I put my stuff? I'll use this in the first couple calls we have with new clients. Where do I put my stuff? If I know where to put my stuff, I know how to find my stuff. We're starting to make some progress in terms of usability and general satisfaction. And then, of course, governance. We can't impede the user experience. If we impede the user experience, everything becomes more difficult. And I'll say this respectfully in our own community and industry. There's some records consultants out there that, based on their past behavior, philosophy, and lack of technology understanding, their desired configuration in something like SharePoint just impedes the user experience to a point that it's a sour relationship, and they bring in another consultant or vendor to, in my opinion, bat cleanup. We've done that a few times to ensure that the first 2 things on the left are are doable, are successful. So don't let governance impede user experience. So there's a couple different ways you can go through and do an information architecture. There's choose your own adventure. Business units define their own structures. Users, of course, buy into that. It's very flexible. It's very time consuming. It's not standardized, and it's very difficult to apply governance. If you're going to unleash this to your business units, a ton of caution here, and you're going to need some very specific tooling that can go and automatically do classification and governance, which even now is still very difficult. There's lockdown, so a strict structure that each group must follow. So if we're doing something like in British Columbia, there's something called the LGMA, which is a local government municipal records retention schedule that's fairly standardized across the province. It's fairly strict, but each organization, each municipality kind of tweaks it to their own liking. You know, we may not have a cemetery in one or an airport in another municipality, so that may not be eligible in terms of our information architecture. Lockdown is fastest to deploy. It's standardized and compliant as well. Heavy training, definitely. A lot of change management, because you're trying to convince them in terms of this information architecture is better for how you were doing things. If you're lifting them off of a file share as a part of a migration, it's not that user friendly. They had a lot more flexibility traditionally in a file share or in a different maybe content management system, where you're going to get that friction point specifically in user acceptance testing or specifically in training, where we end up having conflict, friction, maybe a bit of sparring, and then it doesn't bode well for the buzz and the hype of a new system being rolled out, even if we are migrating for governance reasons. Controlled chaos. So this is the one that I somewhat most commonly deploy. Business units follow a common framework but have freedom at lower levels. So what this means is, let's say I have the duty and the obligation to do records retention on a structure. I will set the site, we will set the doc libraries, set a couple of folders underneath that until we can accurately and confidently circle an area and say everything in this area is going to be, a contract, or it's going to be an employee agreement, or it's going to be personnel related. And after I've hit that level, sometimes that's 2 levels, 3 levels in the structure, underneath that, I'm not concerned with how the business unit or the users want to organize their stuff. If they want to create folders for every Monday or every day of the year or every quarter, it doesn't really matter. They get the flexibility of working a bit the way they want, and we still get the governance check mark by setting that label up at the doc library level, up at the site level, potentially down at some of the folder levels, where we give them the ability to have their own way of working underneath that structure. So the controlled chaos really reduces the amount of training you have to give the user. A lot is reduced in the change management side of things. And if you are migrating into a new system, the time to look at your information architecture is right then. If you want to use a visual analogy to an executive that maybe doesn't understand this as much, I always like to explain it like we're stocking shelves in a new store. So you have the new store, it's completely empty. We're going to build the rows of shelving. We're going to put the barcode and the SKU number on each shelf within that row of shelving. And after we've done all that, that's essentially our architecture, our information architecture. Now we're ready to stock the shelves. So we back the truck in, that's our migration, and we start moving those totes and those items onto those individual spots on the shelves. That's our migration side of things. Everybody knows which row to go to. Everybody knows where, you know, the air filters would be, or the wiper blades if we're in an auto section, and they can grab those off the shelf. This is one that I like to put in front of a lot of clients. Continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. Do not sit in the information architecture stage trying to make it perfect. It can be changed, it can be tweaked. It is not concrete once you've defined it. You may circle back with the business unit after you've migrated them or deployed them and say, look, understand this piece isn't working well for you. Let's see if we can collapse the structure, maybe create a different one for you, open up permissions if that's possible, but start to give them a bit more leeway if they're not satisfied with it. So continuous improvement, focus on that as opposed to delaying for perfection. We had one client, kind of more of an industry friend. They were a client, and we finished up, and one of their records folks was a new graduate, and it took her 18 months to do their taxonomy. Well, they essentially lost all momentum in a project by that point because nobody really wanted to wait for it to be absolutely perfect. So cleanup and mapping, as we move into a migration, there's two ways to really do cleanup. One, are we going to do it at all? If we are, we're either going to go proactive or we're going to procrastinate and we're going to do it reactively. And really the decision turns into how much data are you moving in? And do you have the authority or the desire by the organization to manage that rot before the migration begins? I personally like to do proactive cleanup, run a rot removal tool, run something to at least do deduplication. And it provides a cleaner migration. And what a lot of folks don't think of is it just provides a faster runtime for migration. You're moving a lot less data. And some of the tips here in terms of speeds and what can happen moving into 365 in terms of throttling, it reduces your runtime, reduces your outage time you need to take. And generally, you're just archiving and backing up less information and paying for less in the cloud as you move, presumably there. The reactive side is you can actually let the retention and sensitivity rules clean up your rot for you if you move it into the system. Now, I begrudgingly put this on the slide deck and had some conversations internally here if this should even be proposed. You can do it. It, of course, is less effort. It's going to cost you more storage, and you likely are going to be over your retention period. So maybe in the chat, if anyone can put in there if they're going to move from file share to SharePoint, because if you're on the file share, generally you have a ton of data and you haven't done any records retention on it unless you've provisioned or procured a tool, which is highly unlikely from the file share. But that's one where you kind of see it tripped up, where organizations potentially will move it all in, but then you do have to focus on the reactive cleanup inside of the system later. Cleanup and mapping. So where do we go from here? So where does this fall on the effort side of things? So it really is going to depend on your success definition. What is the intent of this project as we're doing a migration? my example earlier, if we're moving off of a legacy ECM system into, let's say, SharePoint Online, it's going to be pretty much a non-factor. You're not really going to do a lot of cleanup. You're definitely going to have to do mapping, but you're likely going to take record for record out of the ECM system into SharePoint Online if you're moving that direction. If you're coming off of a file share and you have to actually go through and potentially do a rot removal or a cleanup removal, that's where you can start to focus on where it would hit here on the high effort, low impact. If, for example, you're going to be over your SharePoint storage quota, it could be high effort, low impact. You may be better off spending the few $100s per month on an extra terabyte, as opposed to procuring a rot removal tool or spending the time and effort and internal resources or external resources to perform that function. So sometimes it can just be, let's just move it in and do the reactive cleanup because it's a cheaper mechanism for us. We had one client in 2019, just pre-pandemic, just before 2020, say move it all in, put it in this special folder called 99. When it's in the 99 folder, we'll get to it at some point. What's 2025, and they reached out now to start doing the cleanup on that. So it's been 6 years with that data sitting there. So it likely they're just going to wait out the retention period and get rid of it all. So a couple different ways to do the mapping if we're going from one source location to the destination location, is we can do the point A to B. So accounts payable here goes to accounts payable doc library over here, and start to move documents and records one for one. You can do it at the folder level if you're coming out of a larger system like OpenText, where you have an enterprise workspace and like they're really all in one kind of repository. You can do it at one of the level 1, level 2 folders to a site or doc library as well. So if you can get down to the folder level, it can help for sure. If you're coming out of a file share, you're going to look at doing a new information architecture, and you'll likely have the old structure on one side, the desired structure on the other side, and then a mapping, kind of almost a cross matrix where this one is coming from this folder here or these folders, and they're all going to be consolidated into a single folder as we move into the destination location. Metadata mapping. So if we want to preserve the integrity of what we have, if we're coming out of traditional ECM, of course, we probably have metadata. We're able to grab that. If we want to bring any metadata in as a part of the migration, that is possible as well. So let's say we have a bunch of contracts, and as the contracts land in SharePoint, we want them to be automatically extracting the contract end date for us. Microsoft can do that with autofill columns automatically. So as long as we get it to the right doc library and location, we can have autofill columns auto extract, basically a prompt-like instruction we give it to do that. Now, why would we want to do contract end dates? Well, we can easily connect that to our case closure of those records and then run the disposition through Purview. That could be one of your reactive cleanup side of things. We're going to bring in all the contracts, we're going to have it autofill the data for us, and then we're going to push them through the approval process and the disposition. Permission mapping, the least fun of all the mappings. So how do we align and transfer user roles and access levels across permissions? And one thing that I find trips a lot of organizations up is in permission mapping, a lot of them didn't use groups, surprisingly, where users go in groups, groups go on locations, locations really drive access through those groups. As somebody wins the Powerball, wins the lottery, retires, you're just moving new people into those groups. Very simple, but a practice that really wasn't followed as well as I would have thought it would be in the industry. You can let your new IA permissions, great typo guys, define that. The other piece of permission mapping is when you're doing deduplication, it's one thing if the document is a duplicate. It's another thing based on where the document resides, if there's any metadata associated with it, and who has permission to that location for that duplicate document. We all know about convenience records. We're going to have that copy over here in the project folder as well as in the contracts folder because we need 2 copies of that contract as we execute the project. Different people have access to different locations. So, down to brass tacks, yes, it's a duplicate, but the function of that content in that record is completely different based on the location. So you can't just run a dedupe across the whole data set and say, oh, it's duped. You have to go down to a specific level for duplication. We only want to run that dedupe on a project folder. We only want to run that dedupe in the contracts area. Some of the gotchas. So pretty obvious one, don't over-engineer the new system. If you're working with engineers, don't let them make any decisions because it's going to take you forever. That comes from gray hair with me working with engineers, both in the energy and utility space. Only control what needs to be controlled, and remember that success statement. Refer back to that. What is the intent of this project? Is it to sunset old system? Is it to do that in addition to enhancing governance? Is it to do a cleanup project and the destination just happens to be SharePoint for the final migration? Do we need to migrate multiple versions? Key one, this is a complicator. So if we're going to migrate multiple versions, what does that look like? So I'll pick on OpenText. It's one of my past areas of expertise. In OpenText, you can have an item in content server. It can be a PDF. Underneath that, past versions can be Word docs, Excel files, anything else. It doesn't have to be the same file type. So when you go to migrate multiple versions, you now have to stack those versions in SharePoint, which it doesn't like to stack different types on top of each other. So now you're doing multiple versions and multiple file types coming out of a previous system. So it can get very, very complicated. So that's one of the key, forks in the road to take in terms of, are we migrating multiple versions and is that valuable to the organization? Another way of cleaning up content, don't bring across all your versions if you're coming out of an old ECM system. Preserve the modified and created dates. If I could get on a soapbox and gripe at the other vendors in this industry, is time and time again, we always see that the create date and the modified date is the day of the migration, and it's not backdated and preserved from the date of where the content was last touched. File share, other system, I don't know if it's a junior coder on there that's just not thinking through it or what's going on. But time and time again, those dates are not preserved. If they're not preserved, good luck running disposition because it's not going to be accurate and you're going to wait out the whole time anyway. You're better off probably not even migrating. I'm going to walk through one of our migration methodology slides. This takes a minute or two to unravel it. This is one of those ones that you'll want to screen cap on or pull this out of the slide deck later. I'm going to use the example of file shares to SharePoint because it's the most kind of common that we see. But this will walk you through the methodology in doing that. So first piece is pretty simple. Where's that data? Let's identify where that data is. Review the data that's sitting on the file share. Look at the volume, the structure, the usage, get to know that if you're working with a specific department, even in IM or RM, you're not that familiar with their content deep down in the file shares. Look at the document security requirements, access controls, that's current and future. Does this content need to be shared in the future? If we're moving to SharePoint, that makes a lot of sense that we're going to open up external sharing potentially on this location in our information architecture. What's the compliance requirements here? What do we need in place for records retention, labels, policies, etc., that go on this location? Maybe we're looking at sensitivity labels if we're working with HR personnel data or maybe legal settlement data that we want to have some sensitivity labels on this day one as it goes into a library or a site or a folder underneath the library. So identify that data first. Second piece, information architecture. We know what we have. How do we structure this? How do we build those shelves in the store? What does it look like for SharePoint sites, the hierarchy, the doc libraries? What are we doing for departmental records retention? How are we actually going through and do the disposition approvals? Do we have records representatives in each department? Do we have a formal approval process for disposition that we can attach to this information architecture and the associated labels that would go on it? The migration plan and the permission mapping. So even going into this for the planning side of things for the department, what's a busy time of year for them? Right, in municipal, we don't touch parks and recreation in Canada for whenever there's not snow. We leave them alone. We can't touch them. They're busy. They're doing things. They're hiring a lot of temporary staff. We have to watch the busy seasons. Finance, we're not touching anything in the last quarter of a year end. It's chaos. So it's the first month of the next year. So check that out as you're going through and building that migration plan for those specific departments. Config and preparation. So now we actually go through and we build those shelves and build those rows and that information architecture inside of SharePoint. You show this back to the business unit. How does it look? What do you like? Let's move a little bit of content in manually. Look at the permissions and the application of them inside of there. Are they flowing down appropriately from Entra? And then we start prepping migration tools. We have a tool here called Peregrine. I'll talk about that in a second. That aids in the migration of content from file shares and legacy ECM systems. We do validation testing of the environment, confirm the readiness, resolve any identified issues. Do we have anything in here on, simple things like typos, where the migration is going to fail because you put something that's plural that's not supposed to be plural? All that is a part of the config and preparation side of things. Pre-migration validation. So as we go into run a migration, we have to run through some of the checks, and I'll explain this a little bit further in a future slide. But there's certain issues that SharePoint doesn't like as you move content in. It doesn't like specific characters in file names. It doesn't like 0-byte files. It doesn't like long paths. All these things can be detrimental to when you run that migration, and you don't get feedback specifically from tools. And I'm going to call out ShareGate on this. ShareGate's a popular tool. If it doesn't take some of your content in a migration, let's say we migrate 5,000 files and it leaves 87 behind, it's very hard to identify which files it did not migrate. And my team has lived that many times in terms of having to go through and identify that because they essentially don't pull a GUID out. Invalid file listing, so file paths I touched on, and then we actually set up a pilot migration. So let's test some data to go into the system. There's a few things that are critical with doing a pilot migration. One that's often misunderstood or not calculated is runtime. We want to know how long it's going to take to run 5 or 10% of the data. So when we actually go to run the full amount of data, what do we have? Are we running this over a weekend, a long weekend, a significant outage for maybe a week if we have to, freeze up data to get it to move into the new system? Next is full-scale migration. So we're ready to go take that whole department, bring them online into SharePoint, and start to set their file share into read-only mode. So let's say migration starts at 5 o'clock on a Friday, 4:30 on the Friday. That file share is going to read-only. We're going to notify those users. We're going to communicate the migration schedule out to any executives that are responsible for the departmental communication, give them the downtime, set that file share to read-only, and start executing that full migration, including developing an audit trail report. We want to be able to check our work and prove both as a vendor and as a project team cohesively to executives that all the data came in the way we expected it to. A lot of that is just detailed reporting and statistics. Very boring stuff if it goes well, very annoying stuff if it doesn't go well, because you got to dig through it all. And then we go into go live and hypercare. So we want to send that transition email out to clients, users, ongoing user assistance. If you're working with a vendor, I would use a vendor as back of house support mostly. So back of house meaning they should not be the face of your project, because when you hit the cutover period to go back into general operations and your vendor has departed the contract, the agreement, whatever it may be, you don't want them being like, where was that Jordan guy that did that migration? I want to talk to him. You want it to be like, Anne at the front of this to say, Anne was our champion internally. Anne was our coordinator. We can talk to Anne about, maybe navigating the new SharePoint environment, or I need additional training for some new staff or people that maybe were on vacation when we went live. So you want to make sure your vendor is in your face. So this is one of the slides that we like to walk through the procedure with, and I think this is the key takeaway for you folks today. I see some questions popping in. I'm going to get to Q&A at the end, and I'm happy to go back to previous slides. So keep putting them in the Q&A. Tooling. So if we want to look at tools, and if you're going out there to look at tooling in terms of can I do a migration myself? How would I do that? So can it migrate from the source to destination repository? And I know there's probably some people that are like, yeah, great one, Jordan. Way to think through that. As a vendor, we've had migration companies promise us it could do it, but not be able to demonstrate it. And I'm a seeing is believing person. Show me it can do it, and I'll believe you in software. Saying it can do it and not showing me is not valid. And I've done a ton of demos, and I love doing live demos because you sink or swim based on that demo. It either works or it doesn't. So have them show you that it can pull data from a source repository and push it to the destination, let's say it's SharePoint. Preserve those dates in that demo and ensure it supports destination mapping. Can it actually push metadata, push different file names, different conventions into the destination system? Metadata and permissioning, and then can it migrate multiple versions? Is this one of those key considerations you're going to make a decision on? Multiple versions or last version? Does it provide item level reports and statistics? Item level, meaning I want to see the ID from the old system and I want to see the ID of it created in the new system. I want to correlate those two in a single report. Next one is speed testing. How fast does this run? And if there's no vendors on this call, maybe they'll watch the recording and find me in a back alley. But I would ask them how fast you can push data into 365, because throttling is a bit of a black box. And we've had some overcommitments on this that I don't think are realistic from software migration companies that just aren't going to do it as quick as they say it can be done. So those are some of the must-haves. Some of the nice to haves are, can we come from multiple source to destination? So can I have a tool that pulls from file shares, from Alfresco, from OpenText, and can that go all the way into SharePoint? So if I do have more of a hodgepodge of content management repositories, I want to be able to pull from multiple into the destination. Does it have proactive error detection? So the file path too long, restricted characters, metadata issues. Is that something that's important to you? Is that something that the tool has that can do that? Is it more than a migration tool? So some tools will do environmental scanning, they will do permissioning. They get a little stickier in terms of subscriptions and stuff. If you're just doing a one-time migration run, probably don't want to sign up on a long-term subscription for anything. And can it do advanced routing logic? So some are, if the document contains a keyword. So if you had one of those OCD naming convention people and they were really rigid in terms of how they name things, we may want to use some of that logic to find our destination. It works in our benefit. So some tools can do that. And then duplicate detection. Can you kind of get a bit of an all-in-one in terms of duplicate detection on that? Furthermore, can it actually apply retention and sensitivity labels as a part of the migration process? So this is a nice to have because you can set this up manually if you're not doing a whole bunch of different destinations at once. Even if you're doing, like we've done grassroots, 250 labels going in, it takes some time to do it manually, or you can script it. But it's not necessarily something I would go and pay for if I had to get a plus or a premium version of a tool or a solution for that. But it is something that can be done. This is our tool. Our tool is called Peregrine. It was built out of frustration of testing some of the other tools that didn't do what they had committed to in our innovation lab internally. And it migrates out of OpenText, Island OnBase, Laserfiche, and file shares. And it moves it directly into SharePoint Online as our repository. Flexible mapping, error handling, and scalability for complex migrations. It uses the migration APIs, which is a large pipe to move data in. If you want more information, you can scan there, or it'll be in the slide deck after the presentation. Some questions to ask IT. If you're going into those IT meetings and you have to advocate from the governance side of things, is do we have adequate storage on our source system and our destination location? So if we're going to go move 5 terabytes from file shares into SharePoint, do we have 5 terabytes available? What do we do if we go over the cap? Is IT aware of the licensing cost for that in terms of being over a quota? Are we going to need an archiving capability from 365? Define the source and destination systems that we're integrated with. So even though you may be on a file share, you may have specific integrations where utilities or batch files are dropping files in there regularly, and you're going to see a disconnect in the business unit and their process because of just doing a lift and shift or a migration out of the source location. Do you have a disaster recovery plan? Everybody's got a plan. Have they tested it? What's the rollback strategy? A lot of this is common, and it's like, yes, we've done a backup. Okay, how do we do a restoration? When's the last time we actually did a restoration as an organization? So if something does go wrong and the migration tool deletes things instead of copying things, now what do we do? How do we actually get a rollback in place, and what does that take? So 2 terms is RTO and RPO that you can use in those discussions. If we're doing this off hours, Who's around? I've had people say, yeah, I'm on call, but I'm going skiing. I said, I don't think you understand how on call works. You can't be skiing and be on a computer at the same time if we need you. We need you to come and maybe do a restoration for us. So can you sit in a hotel for 6 hours as we do this? And then determine the monitoring and the reporting, the process and the schedule around this. And one of the boring old spreadsheets I use all the time, my team uses, is work breakdown structure for a migration action plan. Who's doing the backup and when does it start and finish? Who's doing the migration and who's going to send go live communications, and who's the escalation contact if we don't have, Jordan participating in number 2 and Andrea is sitting here waiting on number 3. She can get a hold of Freddie and he can get a hold of me and say, let's get this done. Update the status regularly. And even though this looks like a spreadsheet, it starts as a spreadsheet. In the end, it goes in the body of an email. Everybody a part of the migration goes on that email chain, and that gets sent around almost to make you nauseous. You get so many emails on this, but every line will get a strike through as it's completed. So just a little tip there in terms of how to work with IT as you're going through one of these, if you're involved as a lead or even as a participant on the project. Post-migration success. So data validation, pretty obvious one. Do the numbers match? Surprisingly, a lot of organizations, whether that's vendor driven or internally driven, the statistics don't align. We want to know if they don't align, what happened. Was it a skip file? Was it an actual error? Something went offline? 0-byte file, so a file that is actually 0 kilobytes, sometimes won't be migrated. So that may be a skipped file deemed quote unquote successful, but not a 1-for-1 match statistically. So make sure they match and remove all access from the source system post migration. So if it's a file share, what I like to do is set it to read only while we start the migration, leave it mounted to their computer. So you'll still see the X drive as you go into my computer. About 2 weeks later, remove the X drive altogether from the user's machines. They've been comfortable and in the new system for a little while. We take away the crutch of having the read-only file share, and now they're exclusively in SharePoint or whatever the system may be. KPIs. So did we improve data governance? Do we have a better records classification rate? Pretty sure we will. Do we have any destruction volumes? Do we have any data loss from this? What was our success definition from the start? It could be dollars saved exiting other system. Well, we saved $60,000 over 6 months because we no longer use OpenText or Alfresco or whatever it may be. Did we optimize any business processes along the way? Do we have user adoption statistics? You can pull some of this stuff straight out of 365, number of items created, number of items modified, average time it may take a business unit to do something, number of interactions for co-authoring, and that essentially can give you a user satisfaction rate. You can also do this with surveys, of course. Effective records post-migration. So pretty obvious, but this isn't a set and forget type of system, type of initiative. This is a get data in and continue to evolve around the data governance process. I'm preaching to the choir, so I'm at an IT conference. I may go a little deeper on this one, but pretty obvious one. It's a living, breathing system. The content is constantly being changed, modified, and disposed of. Keep at it. I got about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to go through quickly a couple success stories, and then we'll get into Q&A for the last 7 or so minutes. So a couple places we've done this at. We did a large lift and shift at a Fortune 500 global apparel company, took them out of OpenText, moved them into SharePoint, lots of business process and re-engineering in terms of their large organization. Did that project out in 2024. It was pretty lengthy and saved them a ton of money moving out of OpenText specifically. Another one we did was a large electrical and water utility, heavily regulated, of course, is kind of a bit of a specialty here and most common in ECM or records management, of course. I'll leave this in here for future reading if you want to read the slide deck before you fall asleep in bed. And then structured migration. So municipal governments, as you can tell, that's out in beautiful British Columbia here. Jen, to your point, how do you stay cool? You go jump in the ocean there because it's not that warm. This was one of the largest electrical and water generation distributors in Western Canada. Rock cleanup, ton of migration, and just moving into the new EDRMS. So a couple takeaways, Jen, and I had this at the start, but if you want to learn more, there's a couple different ways that even us as Cadence give back in terms of this. There's a QR code there. We have a LinkedIn channel where we do an M365 minute. So every couple days we'll release another 1 minute video on something new and clever in M365, usually governance focused, a lot of purview data in there, purview examples. We do have a records management training in August. The July is actually sold out, so August is coming up. And that's hands-on. So what that means is you actually get to configure Purview with our trainers in the lab setting. This is in partnership with ARMA International. So if you're an ARMA member, you do get a discount. So you can sign up through the ARMA site. And if you want to see more webinars, we have a few others booked with ARMA coming up, almost one a month here, up until and after InfoCon. There's the training specifically. If you'd like to get a hold of me, there's my email address. Shoot me an email. I'm all over LinkedIn as well, so connect with me there. I like to reach out to the community. You'll see a bunch of events we do with the ARMA Edmonton chapter as well. And happy to open it up for questions. So I'll grab the first one out of the thread here. So Anas has a question. What would you say is the most important part of data governance and migration? Well, that's a loaded question. Most important part, if I could pick, I'll pick on the migration side, I'll leave the governance side, but if you're gonna work with a vendor or an internal IT person, get one that understands your source system. A lot of organizations understand the destination, but they have to understand where they're coming from. Getting the data out is actually the hardest part. Pushing data into new systems is a little bit easier, but getting data out of those systems is a lot harder, usually because they're a little bit older and you need someone with more experience. I'll flag that one. Oh, there's Jen.
I was going to say, we have been using the raise your hand option. If you'd like to come on live and ask a question, it has been a fun engagement tool. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll keep an eye on that and let you come on live.
I knew you didn't like me, Jen. Now I have proof. So.
Guess be ready on the fly to answer those ones,
That's
Jordan.
right. Yeah, live demos, hey.
Mhm.
Rot removal tools from Elizabeth was one of the questions. What tools have we used? We've used our own, shameless plug, Peregrine. It does deduplication. Also, tree size is one we use a lot, which does deduplication. So you don't have to spend a lot on those. If you want to get really statistical, you can go to the active navs and the shiny docs and kind of drill into that if you really want to get content analytics, as opposed to just basic deduplication. This is an interesting, how would you attempt to counteract an organization that is moving data from SharePoint to a file share for cost savings? Personally, I'd resign if I was in that organization because they're going the complete opposite way. Elizabeth has her hand up as well. She didn't ask this question, but we'll get to you in a second, Elizabeth. I don't understand the cost savings of going from SharePoint to a file share unless there was some kind of merger or acquisition where the acquiring company is still really old school and they want to divest 365 from the company they just purchased. With data backups and honestly electricity costs, I don't understand why you would go backwards in that. I don't understand the benefit. So love to know more. It's an anonymous question, so I can't even pick on the individual there.
Okay, now I feel like I fibbed to you all. I said we could allow you to come on live, but now it's not allowing me. So we'll work on it. Elizabeth, I'm working on it. Sorry.
Alicia's asking, what are your thoughts on the SharePoint migration tool, SBMT? I've used it for smaller migrations with success, but sometimes it leaves audio and video files behind. So I haven't. So one thing we don't like about SBMT is it doesn't do metadata. That's a big problem when we go to do that. It has great speed. So it is kind of that raw move content in piece. But in terms of the complexities around an InfoGov project, if we do have governance attached to it, it's tough for me to use something that doesn't do metadata. So that's been my experience there. Tammy's asking, if I'm creating a new SharePoint and I am one file off, would you use Excel to compare? I'm not sure of the context there. I'm gonna say it's post-migration, you're one file off. I would probably use the graph APIs to pull it back out of SharePoint. It says government not allows to use third party. Yes, post-migration. I would see if I could get some technical help in terms of using the graph APIs. I don't know the volume, Tammy. So if you're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents, Excel is going to be a bit of a nightmare. I guess you could use the remove duplicates function if you had it all in one column. That's a tricky one. 15,000 files. Yeah, you can probably get away with it in Excel. A couple pots of coffee. Elizabeth, if doing a dupe clearing after migration, what tools have you used? We've went right to the API and pulled out the hash from SharePoint. So if that's too technical for folks, every file, regardless of naming, will have its own hash ID with it. And with that ID, it basically determines if the file is a duplicate or not a duplicate, regardless of how I've named it versus Jennifer's named it. So you can go and use that. I haven't used a specific tool for that, Elizabeth. Like I haven't went out and connected one into SharePoint to do that. Our methodology is to cleanse before we migrate.
And good questions. Got a few more minutes if anyone else has more. And we figured out the come on live.
Oh, we did. Okay.
It has to be the administrator in the back end too. So if somebody wants to raise their hand, we can open up your mic.
Elizabeth had a follow up there. Did you say this is built into SharePoint? Yes. So behind the scenes, they will have that, but it's not like a hit the information icon, show properties kind of thing. If you want more info, by all means, shoot me an email. I can connect you with some of the more technical folks here. That is what I have in the Q&A, Jen. It looks like
also all we had.
Excellent.
All right. Well, guys, this was a great session today, Jordan. Thanks again for your time and for bringing today's content to us. Everyone, keep your eye on your inbox for the follow-up to today's session. And for, like Jordan said, we have like 5 upcoming sessions with Cadence Solutions. So if you can't be a part of one of the sessions that he's bringing to InfoCon, please keep your eye on your inbox and please join us for one of our virtual sessions that are coming up. But please, please, please consider finding some resources to come join us in Phoenix. With that, we will close out today's session. Thank you so much for being with us. Jordan, thank you for your time. And we'll see you on the next one.
That's good. Take care, everyone.